Senator John Cornyn had built his reputation on being He carried himself with the weight of years in public office, always projecting the image of someone who had seen every trick in the book and could parry any challenge with ease. On that day, though, when he sat under the studio lights, he seemed especially comfortable. Almost too comfortable. His tone carried the smug confidence of a man who thought he had already won the room. When the conversation turned to Jasmine Crockett, he leaned in, smiling as if the words he was about to drop were the punchline to a private joke only he could appreciate. With an airy chuckle, he dismissed her passion and policy stances, framing them as nothing more than theatrics. He mocked her intensity, branding her as loud, emotional, and ultimately insignificant. It was the sort of move Cornyn had used before: minimize the opponent, belittle the presentation, and in doing so, discredit the message. The problem, however, was that this time, the jab didn't land the way he expected. Cornyn's mockery was supposed to reinforce his authority, a reminder to the viewers and his colleagues that he was in control of the room. But live television has a way of amplifying not just words, but body language, tone, and timing. The smirk he wore as he delivered his remarks didn't read as clever. It read as patronizing. And in a cultural moment where audiences are far more attuned to condescensionness, especially toward women and people of color, the reaction was immediate. Social media feeds lit up in real time, with viewers noting the unnecessary sharpness in his tone and the casualness with which he dismissed Crockett's hard work. Cornyn underestimated not only Crockett's resolve but also the audience's appetite for authenticity. In his long political career, he had often thrived in environments where authority went unchallenged. Yet, in this moment, his attempt to paint Crockett as all noise, no substance opened the door for a completely different narrative to emerge. By mocking her, he gave her the perfect platform to respond, and in doing so, he shifted the spotlight directly onto her, rather than keeping it on his critique. What was intended to minimize her instead magnified her. The backfire began slowly. Crockett didn't rush to answer him. She sat, composed, listening carefully, letting the weight of his mockery hang in the air. That pause was crucial. It allowed viewers to sit in the discomfort of his remarks, to notice the imbalance in how he had chosen to address her. And then, with measured clarity, she spoke. She didn't mirror his tone, didn't resort to insults, and didn't allow herself to be baited into a shouting match. Instead, she started pulling apart his record, exposing the contradictions between his words and his actions. She reminded him of the policies he had supported that directly undercut the very points he claimed to champion. She brought receipts, not rhetoric. As Crockett went on, Cornyn's expression shifted. The once confident smirk began to fade as he realized she wasn't simply brushing off his mockery, she was dismantling it piece by piece. Every word she spoke not only defended her own credibility, but also undercut his. The more she spoke, the clearer it became to the audience that Cornyn's attempt at mockery had placed him in a defensive position. The senator who prided himself on control was suddenly losing it in plain sight. The shocking part of the exchange wasn't just Crockett's ability to hold her ground, it was how completely Cornyn's mockery collapsed under the weight of her response. For someone who had spent decades shaping his image as a statesman, the optics of being visibly bested by a younger, fiery, unapologetic representative were striking. The irony was inescapable. The moment he tried to make her look small was the very moment that elevated her stature. His mockery didn't silence her. It amplified her. His attempt to diminish her relevance instead highlighted her strength. In politics, moments like these are rare because they're so unscripted. Cornyn had banked on the old playbook of dismissive humor, but the rules had changed, and he hadn't kept up. In that live exchange, the old tactics backfired spectacularly, leaving Cornyn not with a victory, but with a clip that would be replayed endlessly as proof that even the most seasoned politician can be undone by underestimating the wrong opponent. Jasmine Crockett's response to John Cornyn was remarkable not just for what she said, but for how she said it. On live television, under the gaze of millions, she showed that composure can be more powerful than volume, and clarity can wound deeper than mockery. Cornyn had come into the exchange armed with the usual tools. He relied on sarcasm, condescension, and a steady delivery that suggested superiority. But what he hadn't anticipated was how little those tools mattered when faced with someone who refused to be rattled. When she began to answer, there was no hint of frustration in her voice, no sign that his attempt to belittle her had succeeded in throwing her off balance. Instead, Crockett's delivery was even measured, almost surgical. She acknowledged his words, but not in the way he might have expected. She didn't take the bait to argue on his terms. Instead, she reframed the entire exchange. She highlighted his record, his history of speaking against things he had once supported, and his pattern of dismissing those who challenged him. Every sentence she delivered was deliberate, cutting away at the credibility Cornyn thought he had secured. Her composure had a dual effect. On one hand, it strengthened her message, making her sound more authoritative, more confident, and more prepared than Cornyn had portrayed her to be. On the other hand, it exposed the fragility of his mockery. Without the reaction he was looking for, his jabs suddenly seemed less like clever banter and more like desperate attempts to hold on to control. The more unbothered Crockett appeared, the more out of place Cornyn looked. It was as if he had been prepared for a brawl, only to find himself standing alone while his opponent calmly dismantled him with logic. Asterisk. The composure she displayed was not accidental. Crockett understood the stakes. She knew that women, especially black women in politics, are often unfairly judged more harshly when they raise their voices or display anger. The stereotypes work against them, portraying strength as hostility and passion as irrationality. Cornyn's mockery had been rooted in those same stereotypes. His words suggested that her style was all flash, no substance, but by keeping her voice steady, by refusing to match his mockery with anything resembling outrage, Crockett flipped that script entirely. She revealed not only his attempt to box her into a stereotype but also the emptiness of the stereotype itself. Cornyn, meanwhile, seemed unsure of how to respond. He was visibly uncomfortable as she spoke, shifting in his seat, trying to maintain his usual air of control. But there was no clever interruption, no witty comeback ready to deploy. For once, the senator known for his sharp exchanges had been outmaneuvered. The composure of his opponent had stripped him of his weapons, leaving him exposed before an audience that had already noticed the shift in momentum. Viewers watching the exchange could feel the balance of power shift in real time. Crockett's calmness wasn't just a personal victory, it became a collective moment of recognition for everyone who had ever been dismissed or mocked in similar ways. Her ability to remain poised under direct attack resonated deeply, especially because it contrasted so sharply with Cornyn's faltering presence. The silence that followed her clapback wasn't just Cornyn being speechless, it was an acknowledgement that her composure had won the day. The significance of that moment stretched far beyond the television screen. In political circles, debates and hearings are often about optics as much as substance. Cornyn had banked on optics, the image of an experienced senator mocking an outspoken younger representative to establish dominance. But Crockett's composure turned those optics against him. The cameras caught not just her calm, confident delivery, but also his fading smirk and uncomfortable silence. The result was an image that told a story more powerful than any prepared line of his could have delivered. In the days that followed, clips of the exchange spread rapidly. What people shared wasn't just Crockett's words, but the way she carried herself while delivering them. Memes, commentary, and analysis all centered on the same theme: how she remained unshaken while Cornyn stumbled. For someone who prided himself on being the steady hand in chaotic environments, this was a deeply ironic twist. His attempt to undermine her credibility only ended up undermining his own. The entire encounter served as a lesson in how political battles are often won not by the loudest voice, but by the most disciplined one. Crockett's composure turned Cornyn's attack into an unintentional self-sabotage, leaving him with no escape but silence. And in the unforgiving arena of live television, silence can be the most telling defeat of all. The moment John Cornyn fell silent was not planned, and that is precisely what made it so striking. For decades, he had thrived in settings where quick thinking and rehearsed talking points but allowed him to maintain control of any conversation. He knew how to pivot, how to sidestep, and how to turn an attack into an opportunity. That skill was part of his political survival, and it was the reason he had lasted so long in a field where even the smallest misstep could be exploited. Yet on that day, in that studio, he found himself staring at Jasmine Crockett with nothing to say. The cameras captured the shift clearly, the change in his facial expression from confident smirk to blank stillness. It was as if every practiced response he had stored up suddenly became useless. What made the silence so powerful was the context. Cornyn had initiated the confrontation, mocking Crockett as though her voice was little more than background noise. He had expected her to either falter under the weight of his condescension or lash out in frustration, giving him the chance to appear calm and in control. Instead, her composed and precise clapback left no room for him to maneuver. She had directly addressed his record, highlighted his contradictions, and done it all without stepping outside the bounds of dignity. By the time she finished, the air was heavy with anticipation. Viewers expected Cornyn to strike back, but nothing came. In politics, silence is rarely neutral. For a seasoned senator like Cornyn, silence meant surrender, even if temporary. It signaled that he had been caught off guard, that his opponent had struck a nerve he could not immediately protect. The audience picked up on it instantly. Viewers didn't just see a politician pausing. They saw a man who had built his reputation on dominance reduced to stillness by someone he had just tried to belittle. It was shocking not because Cornyn lacked the intellect to respond, but because for once, intellect wasn't enough. The weight of Crockett's words pinned him in place. The irony deepened. The moment, Cornyn had always projected himself as a figure of authority, the one who set the tone and dictated the flow of conversation. To watch him stripped of that ability, on live television, was a rare glimpse of vulnerability in a man who rarely showed any. His silence wasn't a strategic pause, it was an absence of strategy. He was unprepared for the scenario unfolding before him. Every second of that pause magnified the damage, making the silence feel longer, heavier, more defining. Crockett, for her part, didn't press the silence with overconfidence. She didn't gloat or fill the gap with unnecessary words. She simply let it hang there, an unspoken confirmation that she had made her point. The contrast between her calm stillness and his speechless reaction spoke louder than either of them could. She had walked into the exchange as the target of mockery and walked out as the undeniable victor. Not because she shouted the loudest, but because Cornyn could not find the words to reclaim the ground he had lost. Asterisk for the audience. This silence became the centerpiece of the entire encounter. Clips of Cornyn, frozen in place, spread quickly, dissected by commentators, and replayed across platforms. Some argued he was trying to collect his thoughts. Others suggested he was blindsided by how effectively she countered him. Regardless of the reason, the image of a powerful senator left speechless by a younger representative became symbolic. It represented a shift in power dynamics, a reminder that dominance is fragile, and even the most experienced figures can be unseated in the smallest of moments. Asterisk. Cornyn's team tried to downplay the exchange afterward, framing it as nothing more than an insignificant pause. But the damage was already done. In politics, perception often outweighs explanation. And the perception was clear. He had been defeated not by shouting, but by silence. His silence had said more about his weakness in that moment than any words could have repaired. Asterisk. That rare silence echoed far beyond the studio. It became a reminder to other politicians that mockery, once a useful tool, can backfire disastrously in an age where audiences crave authenticity and accountability. Cornyn, usually the one leaving opponents scrambling, found himself cast in the opposite role. And for a man so skilled at controlling the narrative, the story of him being left speechless became one he could not rewrite. What lingered most from the clash between John Cornyn and Jasmine Crockett was not just the verbal sparring itself, but the deeper cultural undercurrent it exposed. Cornyn's mockery wasn't an isolated remark. It was rooted in a long pattern of how political spaces often treat women, particularly women of color. His words carried the weight of dismissal, suggesting that Crockett's energy and passion were more spectacle than substance. For many watching, it felt familiar, like an echo of boardrooms, classrooms, and chambers, where voices like hers were minimized before they were ever fully heard. That's why her clapback resonated beyond the moment. It became a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to be boxed into stereotypes and turns that dismissal into an undeniable statement of strength. Asterisk. Cornyn had spent decades navigating power in a world where his voice was rarely questioned. He was used to being taken seriously the moment he opened his mouth. His authority largely assumed because of the office he held and the years he had accumulated, but Crockett's presence disrupted that assumption. She was not content to play the role he implied, someone loud but irrelevant. She was sharp, prepared, and unwilling to allow his words to define her. Her calm dismantling of his mockery did more than silence him. It highlighted the imbalance of how respect is distributed in political life. Asterisk. This was not just a generational or partisan clash, it was a cultural one. Cornyn represented the old guard, where authority flowed downward and challengers were expected to either fall in line or be cast aside. Crockett represented the growing shift in politics, where challengers no longer wait to be validated by those in power. She validated herself in front of the cameras, in real time, and the public witnessed a shift in dynamic that Cornyn likely never intended to spotlight. The shock wasn't only in his silence, but in what that silence revealed. The old tactics of mockery and dismissal no longer carry the same weight they once did. Asterisk for women, especially women of color, Crockett's response struck a chord. Viewers saw not only her words, but the way she held herself with dignity while refusing to be minimized. In contrast, Cornyn's attempt to reduce her ended up reducing himself. His smirk, once a symbol of confidence, was replayed as evidence of condescension. His silence, once a tool of strategy, was interpreted as defeat. He had stepped into the exchange as the more seasoned figure, but left it as the one who had underestimated his opponent. That underestimation was not random, it was tied to cultural blind spots that have long shaped who gets taken seriously and who does not. Asterisk. The broader conversation that followed wasn't just about one senator being embarrassed on live television. It was about how authority is challenged and who gets to redefine what credibility looks like. Cornyn's reaction exposed the discomfort many established figures face when they can no longer rely on tone, tenure, or dismissive tactics to win an argument. Crockett's insistence on meeting his mockery with composure and facts signaled that the era of being spoken over without reply is fading. Asterisk in the aftermath. Analysts dissected Cornyn's approach, noting how his attempt at humor came across as dated and disconnected from the public mood. Younger generations, especially those engaged with politics online, were less forgiving of condescension and more eager to reward authenticity. Crockett gave them that authenticity. Cornyn gave them a reminder of how easily power can appear hollow when wielded without awareness. The cultural meaning of the moment became bigger than both of them, but Cornyn was central to it because his misstep provided the contrast that allowed Crockett's strength to shine. Asterisk. The exchange also underscored a larger truth about visibility. For someone like Cornyn, visibility had long been a guarantee. His position ensured people paid attention. For Crockett, visibility had to be earned. often in the face of obstacles deliberately placed to obscure her. Yet, in a matter of minutes, she turned the tables, showing how quickly dynamics could flip when preparation met opportunity. Cornyn's underestimation of her wasn't just a tactical error. It was a cultural one, born from the assumption that authority could still be asserted through mockery alone. The shock of the moment wasn't just that Cornyn lost control, it was that millions saw what it looked like when a younger, underestimated voice redefined the balance of power, live on air. The old playbook, represented by Cornyn's smirk and mockery, failed. The new playbook, embodied by Crockett.com and assertive Clapback, succeeded. And in that cultural clash, Cornyn became the unwilling face of a fading style of politics, while Crockett stood as a symbol of the shift that is already shaping the future. Do you want me to also craft the ending statements in 500 words for this story in the same storytelling tone? When the cameras dimmed and the live broadcast ended, the story of John Cornyn and Jasmine Crockett didn't simply fade away. It lingered in conversations at kitchen tables, in the halls of political offices, and across the endless scroll of social media feeds. What made it resonate so deeply was not just the exchange itself, but what it revealed about the state of politics and power in America. Cornyn, with decades of experience behind him, embodied the kind of political authority that once went unquestioned. Crockett, on the other hand, represented a new energy, one that was unapologetic, unshaken, and unwilling to let old patterns go unchallenged. The clash between them was more than an argument. It was a mirror held up to the culture of politics, exposing who is dismissed, who is heard, and what happens when those assumptions are tested. Cornyn's silence will likely follow him longer than he expected. For a politician who prided himself on control and presence, being left speechless on live television was a rare dent in his armor. In the age of viral clips, that dent quickly spread into a narrative. To his supporters, it might be written off as a momentary stumble, but to many others, it was symbolic. A veteran senator faltering in the face of someone he had underestimated. It showed that experience alone cannot shield someone from accountability, and that even those who have mastered the art of dismissive politics can be caught off guard when someone refuses to play along. For Crockett, the moment became more than a personal victory. It was a testament to resilience in spaces that were never designed for her to thrive. Her calm, factual, and unflinching response showed how power can be reshaped not by shouting louder, but by refusing to shrink. The strength of her clapback wasn't just in what she said, but in how she represented so many others who have been mocked, minimized, or told they didn't belong. Her presence and her refusal to back down carried weight far beyond the studio. It reminded audiences that progress often looks like a single person standing their ground until silence reveals the truth. What the world saw that day was more than a debate. It was a collision between the past and the future of political discourse. Cornyn leaned on a playbook that once worked without question. Crockett rewrote the rules in real time, showing that credibility can no longer be dictated by seniority or smirks. The shock of the moment wasn't just that a powerful senator was left speechless, was that millions witnessed it, and in doing so, realized that change in political culture is not only possible, but inevitable. In the end, the story was not about Cornyn losing a battle or Crockett winning one. It was about the undeniable shift happening before our eyes, where voices once dismissed now echo louder than silence, and that silence, the one Cornyn could not break, will remain as the defining sound of a moment that revealed